All right, so hey everyone, how's it going? Today I have the pleasure of speaking to my friend Ali Ilyas. Ali is a psychologist in Pakistan, and he's currently an active researcher in forensic health, mental health, also in Pakistan. And Ali has his clinic open in Islamabad. So I have the pleasure of speaking with him today. And before I get started and ask some questions, I'm just going to let you, Ali, briefly introduce yourself as well. Why did you choose to be in this field? What are some of your goals? And what's the journey been like so far, man?
Mm. So I chose this field for a variety of personal reasons, uh, and they stretch back to having seen a lot of mental illness in my own life, to then a philosophical interest in the philosophy of the mind. I started reading philosophy somewhere in my late teens, and how has the journey been so far? Well, the past year has been really, really good for me. Uh, it's a little difficult in Pakistan because we don't have a very well structured psychological association. For example, you're in the US. Over there they have licensing systems in every state, and it's different in every state, and you have to give examinations and whatnot. The problem here is that you don't really have licensing, so you see a lot of people who are not competent, who do not have the qualifications, but are still practicing what they're not supposed to be practicing. So that's a big issue here because I come across a lot of people who have received harmful therapy from people who are calling themselves therapists. And my goals, I have a few different goals depending on the work that I'm doing. First and foremost, I think my goal is just to be the most effective therapist that I can my focus in my therapeutic practice is on building an authentic relationship with the person that I'm working with. That's very important to me. On a larger level, through my own social media platform and other people whose social media platforms I hop on sometimes, I'm attempting to fill a gap that currently exists in Pakistan because you're not going to hear about a lot of psychologists coming out and speaking to the public, especially our generation. So that's a gap I'm trying to fill. And as far as my research journey goes, the entire purpose of my research plans is that I would like to do research that has an actual impact on policy. So I'm very pro evidence based policy. I think we need a lot of evidence for prison reform, judiciary reform, police reform, and that's something that I think my field can provide. So I'm just on the way to publishing my first article right now. And yeah, I think this is what my research life is going to look like for the next few decades, hopefully.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you brought up this point of like you're doing it because you've seen the issues in Pakistan, especially in this field. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, which I want to bring up, is, and I know you're already on your journey here doing this, which is great. But how do we actually
Mhm.
start to change the conversation in Pakistan when it comes to mental health? From, hey, this is not really a problem, deal with it, you're being weak, to wait, this could actually be a problem, and therapy could save people's lives. Where does that even begin to change that conversation?
So I think what's the concept of a public intellectual? Someone is a public intellectual when the public actually values intellect, right? And currently, we don't have a whole lot of public intellectuals in Pakistan because we don't have a lot of, I mean, our public generally does not really value intellectual discourse. So that's a big problem. And it's not just my field, that's prevalent in all fields in Pakistan, I believe. But your question of how do we make mental health care more accessible? How do we change the conversation around mental health? I think we have to make the conversation relatable. I think so far what happens is a lot of these organizations, some of them are doing some good work, but a lot of these organizations are just throwing information out there into the vacuum that is social media that may or may not be consumed. And it's not really touching anyone, it's not hitting anyone, it's not uh, unearthing or tapping anything truly emotional. If you go back, so if you take a look at my page on Instagram, I have this one post up. It's anonymously posted, but it's basically a post by one of my former patients. And she talks about her difficulty with suicide and how hard it was for her when she came in. And she talks about her journey thus far. We ended therapy after, I believe, 7 or 8 months of treatment. We ended therapy, and it's been 5 or 6 months now. I still get updates from her, letting me know how great she's doing and whatnot. Now, what she wrote was actually relatable. She was talking about something that was actually there. It wasn't coming from me, the perceived expert on the subject, because I could say what I want. People may or may not listen. It was coming from her, someone who had actually been through it. And a lot of people commented on that. A lot of people shared their stories with me after reading that. I was getting a lot of messages about how that post made me want to get therapy. So I think it's about marketing, to be very honest with you. I think it's about marketing like anything else, because it's a service that you're providing. And in order to show people what the value of your service is, you have to make the marketing relatable. And the problem is that people in my field live in this bonsai tree where academics will just converse amongst one another and not really do anything to actually reach out to the public. So that's a gap I'm trying to fill.
No, I love that. I love the fact that you said it's public intellectuals don't really exist, because it's like wisdom, intellectual content is not what's going viral right now, right? It's all the other
Yeah.
stuff, entertainment side of things, that is going viral. And you're trying to fill this gap by saying, hey, this is a problem. And this is not just me speaking. Here is the evidence. Here are the people facing the problem. Let's make this go public. But one of the things I want to ask you is, do you ever feel there's a drawback with you trying to do that and your age? Because I feel like in this field in Pakistan, a lot
Yeah.
of it is like, oh, this guy's too young. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. You have to be at least in your 40s and have 20 years of experience to actually make a difference. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah. So one thing I'm very, very honest about. So I think honesty really helps in this regard, because I'm very upfront about what I know and what I don't know. I recently started doing a weekly podcast with Muzammil Hassan. And on it, there are many times he'll ask me a question and I'll say, I don't know, man. I'm not sure what the answer to this might be, but here's what I think. I have some more questions on it. Maybe once we get the answers to these questions, then we'll get the answer to that question. Uh, and I'm very honest about what my training is in, what I can do, what I can't do. I'm an individual psychotherapist who takes people above the age of 18. Children come to me, or teenagers in the mid to young teens come to me, or families come to me, and I tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not trained in whatever you're looking for. So you go to this person. So first of all, because I'm really honest, I actually have not gotten a lot of backlash about my age. As far as uh, as far as my public image or my public page goes. But when it comes to the clinic, of course, I have a very particular age range of people that come to me seeking therapy. They're in their late teens to late 30s. So I have this 20-year gap of people who are coming into therapy to see me, not people a lot older than that. And I can understand that, because there is a huge, just like I'm sure a lot of us, at least this is what a lot of people say to me, that they're more comfortable going to a therapist who's closer to their age, understands social media, understands what issues the young people face. So I would imagine that older people would want to go to an older therapist, from their generation, from their time. Me personally, I haven't gotten a lot of backlash on the age bit, because I'm just very upfront about what I can or can't do, or what I am or am not competent in. So that helps.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons people like what you're doing and your content, myself included, is like you're not trying to act
Thank
like
you.
an expert. Yeah, in an expert in
Yeah.
something. It's like, hey, this is what I know. I'm documenting my journey along the way. You guys are learning with me. It's not, hey man, this is what you're supposed to do. Like, just putting stuff at people.
Yeah.
Which I really like that approach. And
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's so important, because here's the thing, man. If you're in therapy with me, or even if you're not in therapy with me and you're just having a conversation with me and I'm a psychologist, right? People automatically assume that I'm coming from some place where I'm thinking, oh, I'm an expert, I'm this or I'm that. But the fact is, and I always say this to all of my clients or patients, you are the expert of your own life. I can help you navigate that with the knowledge and the training that I have, but I can never be the expert of your life. Only you can be. So I really have a lot of respect for the autonomy of the individual. And that's something, I think what you just said, I think maybe that's something that is resonating with people, because I don't like to come off as, oh, I know this about you,
you're basically saying I can give you some tips and some tools, but you're gonna have to be the one who actually takes it and uses it and does something with it. And I think it's also, I
Yeah.
mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the self-awareness of the person to know what is going to work for them and what they respond to, right? Is do you help people become more self-aware, or is that something you're telling people like you need to, have that self-awareness to know what's going to work for you?
Yeah. So I was just about to add it, but then you said it already. So I might give people tips. I might give them tools. And the third and most important thing that I do is that I will help them navigate through all sorts of issues in life by becoming more intellectually and emotionally aware.
Mm.
And awareness of all type, really. More somatically aware, which means becoming more aware of your body, becoming more aware of your biases, your
Mm.
intellect, your predispositions, and making connections where they might not see any. There's this show on Netflix. It's called Russian Doll. Have you seen it?
I have not, no.
It's completely unrelated to therapy. But in the first episode, there's this the main character goes to her aunt, I believe, and her aunt is a therapist. And her aunt asks the main character. She says, "Do you know why we need therapists?" And she
Mm.
says, "No, why?" And she says, "Because we are poor narrators of our own story."
Wow.
And that really stuck with me because that's what a therapist helps you do.
Yeah.
They help you string together different pieces or different parts of a narrative and create an
Yeah.
absolutely new one that might help you see life in a way that might make it worth living, you know?
Wow, that's I love that quote. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so one thing I want to touch on real quick, I just want to shift gears a little bit here is, and I think people really need to hear this, which is why I'm asking you this. But
Hmm.
can you talk a little bit about the distinction between feeling low and being in a bad place and like getting your stuff together versus having a biological problem in your brain that causes you to be sad or depressed? Because I think one of the main problems, at least that I've noticed in Pakistan, at least, is that people think that mental health is not a serious issue because people can just figure their selves out. But what they don't understand is people actually sometimes have biological issues that are causing them to feel a certain way. So can you talk a little bit about that distinction?
Yeah. Okay. So before I answer that question,
Mm.
I want to edit some part of your question,
Okay,
which is
sure.
the biological part, because I just want to explain this so people understand.
Sure.
Even if you're learning a new skill like learning how to drive a car, there is going to be a biological mechanism behind that.
Hmm.
So, but you might not, but when you talk about driving a car or when you talk about learning to drive a car, you wouldn't say it's a biological thing that I am learning, right?
Hmm.
So, literally everything you do has some sort of biological basis because any function that the human mind or the human body acts on is a function that has some sort of root in your psychology, your
Hmm.
environment, and your biology. So I just want to add to that
Okay.
any mental illness would have components of biology, components of psychology, and components of
Hmm.
the environmental stuff, the social
Hmm.
stuff. Now, answering your question, uh, so one big difference between feeling sadness and feeling depression. Let's take those two. Okay. So if you're saying that, so depression, we have a diagnostic manual,
Hmm.
and in it there's a bunch of different depressive disorders. But whether it's depression, whether it's obsessive compulsive, whether it's eating disorders, I don't want to focus on the first word. I want to focus on the second one, disorder.
Hmm.
That is the important bit. When we say that someone has a disorder, what we're saying is that their suffering or their symptoms, or call them what you want, the problem that they're facing has become so severe that it is interfering in their day-to-day functioning, either their personal, professional, or social life. If they're seeing a disruption in functionality in either of those places, that's when it's going to be called a disorder.
Hmm.
If you're feeling sad, but it's containable enough that you can function in all three of those areas, then it's not a disorder,
Hmm.
diagnostically speaking. So rather than focusing on, the depression and this and that, I want to focus on that word, disorder. Diagnostically speaking, that's the difference. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely does make a lot of sense. But one thing I will push on that is that sometimes people can just be feeling sad, right? But at the same time, it can be impacting so many areas of their lives where they don't feel like doing anything. They don't feel like getting out of bed. I mean, is that enough to know that this person is depressed, or is this just, hey, I can polish up some of my skills and like, work on my personal development and I can feel better? Versus someone who is actually depressed, who even if they did that things, it wouldn't really like help them in that moment,
So
and they need like
so
medication.
the only yeah, so the only person who can make a legitimate diagnosis or who can tell you whether you're feeling,
Mhm.
whether you're experiencing depression or if it's, not a disorder, but somewhere there on the spectrum, is a mental health professional.
Mhm.
So we can never and depression, it's very tempting to diagnose ourselves with depression because Google is so easily
Right.
accessible. It's so
Yeah.
easy to just view your symptoms. But the problem is that symptoms don't really give you a full picture and they don't help you filter outside information because it's not just symptoms, it's a lot of
Mhm.
other stuff that's going on that you have to assess. So, absolutely, someone who's been lying in bed for 3, 4 days, they might be going through some form of grief, they might be going through
Mhm.
quite a bit of sadness, they might even be lazy, they
Mhm.
might not be depressed,
Mhm.
but they also might be. Only when you go to a professional and you ask, they have a proper clinical interview
Mhm.
with you and they make an assessment, and you find out if what you were experiencing is, you know,
Mhm.
it's a disorder. I mean, if you're going diagnostically, then
Mhm.
only a clinician will be able to get that diagnosis.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And like on this thing, you said
Yeah.
like, oh, if someone's like laying in bed for 4 days, they feel like they're in a rut, right? I wanted to ask you as well is like, have you ever personally felt that? And like, what are some of the tangible things you could actually tell someone to maybe get out of a rut and to experience, you know, because like genuine emotions of joy or like happiness? Because I think that the ultimate human ambition, and this is me personally, is like the emotions we feel on a day-to-day basis, I think define how successful we are. Because if we're feeling joy and happiness and are genuinely content, I feel like that is a form of success. Because a
I,
lot of,
I fully agree.
yeah, a lot of people get caught up in their journeys and they're like, oh, I have to be successful, I have to make this much money, I have to do this. And myself included, I've been like this so many times. But then the more you go through it, you're like, wait, am I happy, am I content? And then that's like
Yeah.
genuine like satisfaction in being happy. So what are like some of the things that you've done to experience this more on a day to day?
I think I have the perfect metaphor for this. So, of course, I've been through all of that too. And often, I get tagged in this meme. How do psychologists or therapists become depressed? Just look at your notes, bro. And and there is a general view that psychologists or psychiatrists or therapists might not experience the same issues that others do. But there's this really great quote, I believe it's by Stanley Milgram, who's a famous psychologist. He said,
Mhm.
I study human behavior, but I cannot escape it.
Wow.
And that's very profound to me, right?
Yeah.
So now just coming to what, and this is the most important thing. I'm going to explain what happens when someone is sort of stuck in a particular thought loop
Mm-hmm.
or stuck in this negative thought pattern that they seem to not just be able to get out of, whether it makes them sad, anxious, angry, whatever. So I'm going to do this exercise with you. So you
Okay.
just put your hand out, right? You put your hand out at shoulder length. Now I want you to put a thought on each of your fingers. And if anyone's watching, they can do this too. I want you to put a thought on each finger. Just take a moment and do that.
So
And let
what,
me know
like,
when you're
am
done.
I am I visualizing what the thought looks like on each finger?
No, so you can just put a sentence on it. For example,
Okay. Okay.
I'd like to have a puppy. For example, that's
Okay.
one thought on my pinky, and then another thought on my
Okay.
on my next finger, another thought on the next one. So just take a moment and do that.
Okay. I have thoughts. Yeah.
You got it? Okay. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to put the palm of your hand on your nose, right? Just like this, the way I'm doing it right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now you're going to look around. Just try and look around and tell me, can you see things clearly?
No, just through my fingers and like my peripheral vision.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even what you are seeing is tinted by the image of your hand, right?
Yes. Yep.
Now you put your hand back out to shoulder length. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're feeling really anxious or really angry or really sad, and you have a lot of negative thoughts, this is how you're looking at the world.
Mm-hmm.
Am I making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That
And
makes
what
sense.
we try to do, and what we try to do in therapy is we try to put your hand out to shoulder length and we say, listen, you don't have to avoid these thoughts. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to avoid these emotions. Simply acknowledge them
Mm-hmm.
so that you know that they're there. But if my hand is out at shoulder length, I can still look around and see everything around me while still acknowledging all of that.
That's amazing.
So yeah, and that's this is a very famous. This isn't mine. So this is a very famous uh, metaphor. It's called the hand technique by Dr. Stephen Hayes, who is the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, if people can learn how to acknowledge things that they otherwise feel that they have to reject or push down, that can change your life incredibly. Because what's our knee-jerk reaction when we have a negative thought? Distract and avoid. That's your knee-jerk reaction. But what really helps you is actually a counterintuitive approach where you say, okay, I'm not going to fight this thought or this emotion. I'm not going to push it down. I'm not going to avoid it. I'm going to let it come through and see what happens. And the chances are it's not going to be able to stay for long.
Wow, that's amazing. I doubt that was amazing exercise, man. Because but does this also apply to people? Because when you told me to put thoughts on my hands, right? My thoughts were not negative. I was envisioning my future and like
Yeah.
cool, like really cool things that I want to happen. So does this also apply to that, to be more in the present moment? Like take away the future thoughts you're having or the things you want in your life and just, kind of be here right now, be present. Does it also apply to that, or is it only for negative thoughts?
Yeah. No. So 100%. You got it right. You know how you were telling me earlier how you would sometimes also get caught in the rut of money and this and that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, that's the same thing. Your thoughts are up here, right? You're so stuck in what you want to have 1 year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now that you're unable to live your life in the present. So the entire point of this exercise is to show people that you don't have to change the content of your thoughts. What you have to change is your relationship with your thoughts. Rather than rejection, avoidance, and distraction, work towards acceptance and letting those thoughts or those emotions come, stay, and go. That's the purpose. So it's not really the thought that's the concern, negative, positive, whatever. It's the relationship with those thoughts.
That makes a lot of sense. So, from a tangible standpoint, how can someone actually practice this? Because it's I think for someone who's never practiced this, it's very difficult. They have anxiety. They're thinking of the future.
Yeah.
They're thinking of the past. What are some tangible things someone could do to actually be more
Well,
focused on
the best thing that someone can do to ground themselves in the present is to bring their attention from. I mean, this is one of the many ways, but to bring their attention from their thoughts or their emotions to their sensations. So if I'm holding a hot cup of coffee, then I start focusing on how my hand feels. This is something that really grounds you in the present. This is what you call a grounding technique. And if anyone watching this, if they want to go and Google grounding techniques for anxiety or anger, you can have a whole list of them come up. This is one thing. Then the other stuff is stuff that takes a little more time, that's a little more long term. It's not as simple as me teaching a technique. This is something that takes time and awareness, and this is what your therapist is for.
So what you're talking about is really mindfulness in a way of like, hey, be what's around you. What are you feeling? If you're eating something, like, okay, let's try to enjoy this food, like what's around you and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as staying in the present goes, yes. But what I was talking about in terms of your relationship with your thoughts, that takes a little more time. I mean, that's something that will be more time consuming. There's ways to getting to that, but it's not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2.
Of course,
because the person you're doing it with is that dynamic will change everything entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's any habit that takes time to practice and actually master, but it's one that is so, so worth it, right? And I mean, I'm practicing this
Yeah,
myself right now, and it's so right what you said is you can have all the ambitions in the world, you can want an amazing future, but you have to understand life is lived in the present moment. If you're missing the moments, you're missing the life. And there's this really good quote I like, which is people spend so much time of their whole lives planning for a perfect life while it passes them by, which really hit me because I
yeah.
was like, wait, that's what I'm doing. So yeah,
That's absolutely true. I completely agree. Absolutely, 100%.
yeah, man. Yeah, I know we have not too much time left here, so I just want to close with one last question, which is I think applicable to a lot of people, which is stuff I've
Hmm.
kind of been talking about too. Is when people have something they want to do, right? In your case, it might have been, hey, I want to finally put out some content on social media and actually change the conversation here and do what you know public
Hmm.
intellects don't exist. So I want to do that. So people might have
Yeah.
other ambitions. They might want to start a cooking business. They might want to do other things. Why do people not actually do that stuff? Because it kind of fascinates me that people don't do the things they want to do because they're afraid of they're going to fail, or they're afraid people's judgment, what other people are going to think. What would you tell
Yeah.
someone in that position? What's something that they can think about that might help them get out of that thought process?
Well, first things first. I mean, I'm sure the reasons would vary for every individual, but uh, one big roadblock towards any sort of habit formation or towards doing anything that you want to do
Hmm.
is something called the action intention gap. Wait, no, am I saying it right? Yeah, I believe it's the action intention gap. Yeah, I think so. Which is that you have the intention, but you don't have an actionable plan for it. So
Interesting.
for example, I want to be, for example, I want to let's take your page for example. You say
Hmm.
by the end of next month, I want to have 5,000 people following my Instagram page, for example, right? Now, that's great if you want that, but how you get to it, you need a proper plan for that.
Hmm.
Do you want to be posting consistently at a particular time every single day? And then what type of
Hmm.
content are you going to be posting? So rather than saying, I want to lose 3 kgs by the end of this month, start calculating how you're going to do that. How many days are you going to be working out?
Hmm.
Because what happens is that decision making, the ability to make decisions, is a psychological resource, and a psychological resource is something that diminishes over the day. So if you wake
Interesting.
up and you're thinking, okay, what time am I going to work out today? Then you're going to be spending so many
Mm.
positive resources just thinking of that you might not actually end up working out.
Yeah.
Rather than if the previous night when you slept, you decided tomorrow and every day after that, I'm going to be working out at 5 p.m. Now, when you
Mm.
wake up, you don't need to be worrying about, oh, when do I work out? You already know. So then your mind and your decision making abilities can shift to other things that might be important throughout
Mm.
the day.
Yeah, you have it kind of written out and you know exactly when you're going to do it. I think one of the most like productive things I've ever started doing is just before I go to sleep, just having like a sort of time block of when I'm going to do something, because when I wake up, I don't have to worry about it. I know exactly when I'm going to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been maintaining a daily journal sort of a thing where I write down the things I have to do, the things I have done, and the things I want to do.
Yeah.
And I've been keeping that regularly for the past 3 or 4 years now, and it's been very helpful.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think like having a plan definitely enforces yourself to actually follow through more with it. But I also feel like there's a fine line between planning and over planning, because you can also be in a
Yeah,
position where you're planning for so long and you actually use planning as a form of procrastination. And I did this with
yeah,
content
that's
creation.
yeah,
I wanted to create content for so
yeah,
long. I was planning for years, and then I was like, okay, I'll do it. I know what I'm gonna do. But once I actually do
yeah.
it, the plan changes, man. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Then with that, on the opposite end of that is when what you're just talking about is something called the perfection procrastination
Yeah.
cycle,
Yeah.
where you want to get things
Yeah.
so perfect that you end up procrastinating to
Yeah.
actually doing it because perfect doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think those are two diametric opposites.
For sure, man. Yeah. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for joining me here, for hopping on. I think
Of
the
course.
stuff you've said is phenomenal. It provides a lot of value to a lot of people. You're amazing. Keep doing your what you're doing, man.
Thank you so much,
Um,
man. No, I
yeah.
really enjoy watching the content you're putting out as well. And I'm sure that a lot of
Yeah.
people are going to be getting a lot from that too.
Thank you so much, man. Yeah.